All right, let's jump into one of the great what-if stories in the history of computers. We're going back to the 80s, a time when the telephone giant AT&T decided it was going to take on IBM and completely change the world with its very own PC. I mean, they had a secret weapon, a legendary operating system, and a ton of cash. So, what on earth happened?
You have to imagine the scene in 1984. This was the big promise. The air was just buzzing with this idea. AT&T, the company you knew for, your phone line, was telling the world it was about to put a Unix-powered computer on every desk, going head-to-head with the undisputed king, IBM.
Exactly. I mean, with that much swagger and a piece of software that was already legendary, failure just didn't seem like it was on the table. But this story, wow, it's a classic cautionary tale. And to really get it, we first need to understand the absolute earthquake that shook AT&T to its core and forced their hand.
See, for decades, AT&T was this comfy, regulated monopoly. They were the phone system, period. But a massive government antitrust case broke the company up in 1982, and by '84, that whole process was done. All of a sudden, this giant was thrown into a competitive dog-eat-dog world that it just did not understand.
And you can't overstate what a massive change this was. Before, they were a protected giant. After, they were in a street fight with these new, scrappy companies like MCI and Sprint for their main business. So they were desperate for new ways to make money. And the one huge market that was suddenly open for business was computers.
So AT&T zeroes in on the biggest kid on the playground, IBM. Back in the early 80s, IBM looked completely unbeatable. Their PC was the gold standard, and their big mainframe computers ran pretty much all of corporate America. AT&T knew it was going to be a tough fight, but they were convinced they had an ace up their sleeve.
And this was it, UNIX. Born in the legendary Bell Labs, it was powerful, it was flexible, and, this is the most important part, it was portable. See, unlike other operating systems that were locked down to one type of hardware, UNIX could run on almost anything. AT&T saw this as the key to finally breaking IBM's stranglehold on the market.
The brilliance of Unix came from ideas we totally take for granted today. Things like pipes, which let you snap together these tiny, simple programs like Lego bricks to do really complex stuff. That was revolutionary. And because it was written in the C language, you could basically pick up all your software and move it to a totally different computer with hardly any work. It was like the ultimate Swiss Army knife for computing.
So the path from a cool lab project to a commercial product happened fast. For years, AT&T couldn't actually sell Unix because of those monopoly rules, so they just licensed it out for cheap to universities, which is why it got so popular. But after the breakup, the gloves were off, and they moved quick. By 1983, they had System V, a polished, commercial version they were ready to push as the next big industry standard.
Okay, so here's the game plan. It was a two-step attack. First, they'd put out a regular, boring, IBM-compatible computer running MS-DOS. That would get their foot in the door, establish the AT&T brand in stores. Then, they would drop the real prize, a machine built from the ground up for Unix, ready to blow everyone away.
But when that first machine, the Model 6300, actually came out in 1984, the reaction from everyone was basically, huh? After all the hype about Unix, AT&T just released a slightly faster, slightly cheaper version of an IBM PC. It was a total head-scratcher.
And here's the official reason why. The chairman of their computer division basically said, look, we have to face reality. MS-DOS was the king, customers already had tons of software for it, and they couldn't just pretend that wasn't true. Which, okay, fair enough. But it was hardly the bold, world-changing move everyone was waiting for.
Then, almost a year later, the wait was finally over. The AT&T UNIX PC Model 7300 was here. This was it, the main event, the machine that was supposed to show off the magic of Unix and change personal computing as we know it.
And it was a complete dud. The user interface felt clunky and old compared to the Apple Macintosh. It had these mind-boggling design flaws, like putting the shutdown command right next to the run command. But the real killers were performance and software. A spreadsheet calculation that took a few seconds on an IBM PC took 11 minutes on the Unix PC. Can you imagine? And as for software, it was a ghost town. There was basically nothing to run on it. So what did the market think? Well, the verdict was fast, it was brutal, and it was clear. This machine that was supposed to launch a new era of computing, yeah, nobody was buying it.
Just look at this chart. It puts the whole thing in perspective. In 1985, AT&T maybe sold around 15,000 Unix PCs. In that same year, Apple sold 420,000 Macs and IBM sold 1 million PCs. I mean, AT&T wasn't even playing in the same league. It was a complete and utter wipeout.
And the financial hit? Oh man, it was just as bad. In 1986 alone, it's estimated that AT&T's computer division lost a jaw-dropping $600 million. They were just hemorrhaging money.
The whole dream just fell apart with incredible speed. By the end of '85, their next new computer was another IBM clone. By the middle of '86, they were desperately cutting their orders for the UNIX PC, and by October, they just stopped shipping it entirely. The retreat was complete, and it all led to the company's first financial loss in over 100 years.
So you have to ask yourself, how does a company with all that money and all that brainpower get it so wrong? Well, the real problem wasn't the tech, and it wasn't even the strategy. It was the culture. It was an arrogance that came from being a monopoly for decades. And really, their own executives tell the story best.
Just listen to this quote from 1985, right as their whole plan is spectacularly failing. "We have out-PC-ated IBM." This is what the president of the division was saying. There was just a massive disconnect between how they saw themselves and what was actually happening in the real world.
And it wasn't a one-off thing. Here's another one. "We know what we're doing. I'm not at all worried." That's not how a hungry competitor talks. That's how an old giant talks when it feels like it's just entitled to win. They were completely blind to their own weaknesses.
Now, this is where it gets really fun, playing the what-if game. For instance, AT&T had its own incredibly fast 32-bit processor called the WE32000. People who used it said it was a screamer, but because of some internal politics, they put a slower Motorola chip in the Unix PC instead. It was a huge, unforced error. They had a Ferrari engine in the garage and put a lawnmower engine in the car.
But what about Unix itself? What if, instead of trying to control it and license it, they just set it free? What if they had open-sourced it, kind of like what Google did with Android years later? It could have created the exact software ecosystem they were so desperate for.
And maybe the biggest what if they had just been a little less ambitious? At the same time, this company called Compaq was making a fortune by simply building better, faster IBM clones. AT&T's clone was actually pretty decent. What if they had just put all their energy into that instead of this grand, flawed plan to change the world? In the end, AT&T's failure is just this powerful, powerful lesson. They had the tech, they had the money, they had the brand recognition, but they just didn't have the humility or the street smarts to compete in a market they didn't own. And this final thought really says it all. Trying to just do computer is a very dangerous game for big companies from other fields, and AT&T became one of its most famous casualties.